Hello, let me welcome you to the conversation segment of the Signature Show this Sunday. Last week, fuel queues emerged suddenly in Abuja and in Lagos. I cannot speak of what happened in Port Harcourt. But why did the fuel queues come back? Simple. Nigerians expected that the government would remove subsidy on petrol. By the way, by the provision of the Petroleum Industry Act, deregulation of the oil industry is supposed to start at the end of February. I call it a euphemism for removal of subsidy. But the Minister of State for Petroleum, Timi Silva, speaking to reporters, said Nigeria would not, for now, remove petroleum subsidy. As a matter of fact, he said, the government was asking for an 18-month extension within which the subsidy will remain. Now the government is going to the National Assembly to ask for an amendment to the PIA Act, that is Petroleum Industry Act, so that the February date will not be compelling on the government to deregulate and therefore remove subsidy. Questions arise which I'm not very competent to provide answers to. So this afternoon, I'm conversing with first a lawyer, an oil industry player who has suddenly become, who wants to serve. He's not a politician of your kind. He wants to serve. Madaki Ameh. Madaki, you're welcome to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Chief Mabezi.
Incidentally, Madaki is a lawyer, as I said, but I also need a figures person on this program. So, joining by Zoom this afternoon is Nick Agule. Nick Agule is a chartered accountant. He's worked with Shell. He's worked with Chevron. He's worked with BP. Just in case you don't know what BP is, what we used to call British Petroleum, but their brand now is just BP. Nick, let me welcome you to the conversation.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, as I said, Nick is joining us via Zoom. Madaki, you are here. The concept of subsidy in our kind of economy, is it sensible?
Yeah, thank you very much. There are many things that happen in Nigeria that are completely not sensible. You know, subsidy is definitely one of them. Subsidy of petrol is one of them. We've been running this subsidy regime, you know, for many years, and we haven't seen the impact on the economy in a positive way. You know, Nigeria is a very amazing country where people insist on doing the wrong thing, and then they insist on it with such vigor, you know, that it becomes policy and everybody just throws their arms up in the air. That is all we can say about the subsidy thing. You know, it's completely anachronistic, it's completely unnecessary, and it's completely destructive of an economy such as ours, where the government does not earn enough, you know, and then you just claim that you're putting money in people's pockets to enable them buy petrol for their cars to drive around. To what end? We're not subsidizing food, we're not subsidizing education, we're not subsidizing healthcare. These are the things that matter to human beings, you know, from day to day. But to say, let's give you enough money to put petrol in your car, to go where? How many Nigerians own cars? This is actually shameful, you know, and I'm embarrassed that the government continues to kick the can down the road instead of doing the right thing. And there are many ways to do the right thing, you know, as we'll probably discuss in the course of this conversation.
Let me come to you here. Something that sounds logical, fairness. The government is trying to be considerate and fair to all its citizens. It appears unfair that for the same product, the same citizens in different locations pay different prices.
Yeah, sure. That's the way the world works. You know, those who live closer to the source of supply of any product definitely have to pay less than those who stay farther away. That it happens to yams. In Benue, for instance, if you go to my village right now, you can buy a tuber of yam for 150 naira. If you come to Abuja, the same tuber of yam of that day, it takes only 3 hours to drive from Benue from my village in Adoka to Abuja, by the way. That same tuber of yam, you can buy it for like 600 naira. That is just by putting it in the boot of your car and bringing it, out of the boot of your car. So, and the same happens for gari, the same happens for fish, the same happens for virtually everything, So, I don't know what the magic about petrol is, and why it is so touchy, and why, government have been doing this for years and they cannot see that this is actually destroying the economy, They see it obviously, but I think because a lot of people are feeding fat on this, and the figures for subsidy just keeps doubling every time. The last time I heard about subsidy, it was 1.5 trillion naira a year. But the provision they are asking the National Assembly to make now for subsidy for the next 18 months is 3 trillion naira. Last year, the federal government earned, the actual earnings of this country was just about 5.2 trillion naira. And then you're using more than half of that, to subsidize petrol for people to put in their tanks. It's such a corrupt sleaze. It's actually almost sickening. You get the point. But there's a larger way to look at the subsidy issue. We need to ask ourselves whether there indeed is a subsidy. My position has always been, and this has been on for many years. I remember when I was doing the interview to join Arthur Anderson in 1994, the issue cropped up, whether we're subsidizing petrol or not. And I maintained that position at the time, and I maintain again that whatever they call subsidy today is actually the product of inefficiency, incompetence, corruption, and crass either ignorance or deliberate mischief on the part of government. Because I can't understand where the subsidy is coming from. Subsidy, as we practice it in this country right now, is a self-inflicted injury, which can be removed tomorrow if we have the political and the economic will to do what is right. And again, I keep saying it, and I've been saying this since 2012, when we had the first subsidy strike in this country. When the National Assembly was probing the issue of subsidy, and then there was a lot of outcry. I think Jonathan was the president at the time. I've been saying it that the removal of subsidy need not lead to an increase in the pump price of petrol.
But I'm going to come to that. I'm going to come because very important when we begin to seek solutions and when we begin to query really whether there's a subsidy or not. Nick, if you are hearing me now, over the years, do you think Nigerians really have benefited from fuel subsidy?
Thank you very much for that question. Over the years, the people who have benefited from subsidy are the rich men and women of Nigeria who have on average 3, 4, 5, sometimes 10 cars. You drive into some estates and you will see the number of cars parked in the forecourt of the houses. You will think they are actually car dealers, but they are not car dealers. They are actually having this array of cars, and these are no small cars. These cars are big cars that guzzle petrol up and down. These people drive in convoys. These are the beneficiaries. The other beneficiaries of fuel subsidy are the West African countries. Today, we are being told that about 70 million liters of petrol is consumed in Nigeria every day. This figure was a few years ago. And we know very well that the number of cars on Nigerian roads have not doubled. So about 30 to 40 million liters of this petrol is simply going across our borders, smuggled into West African countries. The real people who should be benefiting from subsidy, the poor of Nigeria, are not benefiting because one, they don't have cars. You can go to a village and the entire village, there's nobody with a car in that village. Number two, the poor, the fuel the poor use is kerosene, and the subsidy on kerosene has long been removed. Also, the poor are ferried in mass transit, buses, trains, boats, trucks, and all these vehicles use diesel. And because the price of diesel has since been deregulated, the fares that the poor pay has already been escalated to account for the deregulation. So if you look at this fuel subsidy issue critically, you will find out that Nigeria is actually robbing from the poor to fund the lifestyle of the rich.
Well, Madaki, you can see we're having challenge with Nick's signal. There's an important point he's made there, and that is that we're taking from the poor who ought to really benefit, but who don't benefit, to fund the lifestyle of the rich. We're taking from the poor who are not benefiting to fund the pockets of the smugglers. But why is it that each effort to remove subsidy, organized labor, which says it represents the poor masses of Nigeria, kick? Is that as a result of lack of understanding, and therefore we in the media are not educating properly? Or any other challenge you can see?
Well, honestly, it beats my imagination. But having been a unionist myself at some point in my career, you know, I used to be Pengassan vice chairman in Shell when I was there. You know, I think there is also a desire by unionists to be seen to be relevant. So when the union movement begins to see itself as being taken for granted or ignored in some things, you know, they like to play to the gallery, you know, just so that their members know that they're still important. And that's why, you know, every time they're threatening to strike or to move, you know, against the government or whatever the management of the organization, that, you know, that unionizing is. You know, so that's the way I see it, you know, quite frankly, because from a reasonable perspective, you know, nobody can argue that the petrol subsidy as we have it currently makes sense. You know, you have a car, you go to the petrol station, buy petrol like any other product at the price that is available to be paid, you know, and then you go away. It's just like you have a diesel generator, and then you go and you insist that you must buy, you know, at a certain price because you can't afford it at a higher price. So if the government could do it for diesel, which is actually more useful to the economy than petrol, because more, you know,
more industrial machines.
cheaper diesel will translate to cheaper prices in, you know, of the things that are produced, you know, industrially and so on. Kerosene, which most of our people use to cook their food, you know, is also allegedly deregulated and so has become more expensive. But my grounds about subsidy is not even the fact of, you know, the pricing. You know, it is the concept around it. You know, the government cannot simply sit down in their warped sense of benevolence and decide that instead of food to be cheaper, petrol should be cheaper. You know what I mean? We don't drink petrol. You know, we don't, you know, so I can't follow the thought process. You know, and so for it to be so difficult for them to come to a decision to do what is right by petroleum products. And I think that right now diesel is overpriced, DPK, which is kerosene, is overpriced, you know. Because if you apply the right principles of petroleum economics, these products should not be priced so differently, you know. So somebody somewhere is definitely benefiting financially heavily on a daily basis from this so-called subsidy. And they have formed a very strong cartel that is holding this country by the jugular and draining, as it is now, 55% of the national budget, where most of it is even borrowed. You know, if it was money that was available somewhere, you know, from our earnings, I wouldn't have a problem. But to subsidize petrol, they are now having to borrow money in order to give to us to put petrol in our cars. It's the most absurd kind of economic reason that I can never imagine. Why government is able to sustain it and to sustain the lie, you know, and continue to defend it to themselves, and they can sleep well at night, is something that actually bothers me to high heavens.
Let me reason for the government. A government exists to serve the people, and a government cannot serve a dead people. no matter the argument we are making, let us take Lagos and Abuja as a simple example. Most of the commuting in Lagos is with taxis, cars, downfall, buses. The big buses that use diesel are not even 1/4 of these small means of commuting. And most of them use petrol. The same thing in Abuja. Let me say, I cannot say for fact, the same thing in Kano, the same thing in Port Harcourt. It sounds to me, honestly, reasonable that government should do something about it. But the question is, each time the government has promised to remove subsidy and use the gains of subsidy to alleviate the suffering of these people I've spoken about now, provide better transport services that will now use the diesel that is available in their numbers. I don't need to drive my car from my house to my office if there was a good transport, decent transport service. Government doesn't do that, making the citizen to ask questions and therefore insist on returning subsidy. Doesn't this sound logical?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all to me. Because the fact that there are many vehicles, it's just like you go to New York City. I'm sure there are more cars on the road in New York City or in the city of Beijing, or in the city of Guangzhou or in the city of London than there are in any of these cities that you have just mentioned. But the government doesn't come and say, well, I think the price of petrol is too much for you to pay, so, come and take a handout to buy petrol in your cars. We rather do that for healthcare. We rather do that for education, where we have been thrown under the bus, where the private, most of the schools are privately owned anyway. And they can come up with any amount of money as school fees, and the Ministry of Education does nothing about it. So why are we not subsidizing education, which is where the future of our country lies? Why are we not subsidizing healthcare, which is what keeps us alive? Why are we not subsidizing food, which we must eat at least twice a day, even if you are a madman? So we are here in the country where the government believes that the benevolence they can show is to allege that they are putting money in our pockets to enable us buy petrol for our cars, which we cannot even afford. How many Nigerians can afford cars? And again, I still make this point, that in talking about subsidy, and why I believe clearly that there is no subsidy, people are just pocketing money that belongs, to the common patrimony. In talking about subsidy has always been a self-inflicted injury in this country. If we apply the right principles, I keep saying it, there's no reason why we should, even at today's, in today's, economic indices, exchange rate, price of crude in the international market, whatever the indices you want to use, there's no reason why petrol, a liter of petrol, a liter of diesel, a liter of kerosene should be anything more than between 100 naira and 120 naira per liter. And this knowledge exists. Since 2012, I've spent time, with my team of consultants to study the Nigerian oil and gas industry, especially as it relates to petroleum pricing. And it is very simple. The blunder is actually so easy to see that it's actually shameful. That, those who claim to be, the technocrats running the industry have then either decided to be deliberately illiterate and cannot see it, or they're just being mischievous and they're just inflicting perpetual pain on the country. It got to a point where I had to go, because when I tried to express these ideas and operationalize it, I had to go to, and I was told that, that we needed the big name behind the idea for it to work. I had to go to KPMG, the best consulting firm that you can find in the world. And I said, I used to work there, when it was at Anderson. And I discussed the model with them. We challenged it for half a day with the best of the brains in KPMG. And we agreed that this will work anyhow you turn it around. You get the point. And this will not take a month, to implement. And then we will level the price of petroleum products at anything between, 100 naira and 120 naira, no more. Because, you apply the right principles. We produce crude oil, for God's sake. As it is right now, crude oil is 70% of the price of the pump, the price of the liter at the pump. So why will you inflict an injury on yourself? You get the point. Here is a clearly self-inflicted injury on account of people who are suffering from, brain blockage, in my view. You get the point. This is very easy.
Now, Madaki, look, the bigger issue now is the government postponing the evil day?
Yes, the government is clearly kicking the can down the road. And our governments in Nigeria have always been known to kick the can down the road. Every responsible government faced with a problem is supposed to come up with a solution and deal with it. That's why we elect people into office. But here we are, a very cowardly government, that cannot take a decision on absolutely anything. You get the point. So when faced with a challenge, they look around the perimeter. Now we are entering an election season. And they know that, they will be savaged at the polls if they dare do anything to it, if they dare make themselves any more unpopular. The government is already sufficiently unpopular as it is. So I'm sure that they are, this kicking the can down the road, this 3 trillion naira bill is actually, I view it in 2 ways. First of all, it's a self-seeking, kicking the can down the road by the APC government, where they say, well, in 18 months' time, the government would have changed anyway. So let that problem be the problem of the next government and let them deal with it the way they want. It's completely shameful because I remember very clearly in 2014, when Buhari was contesting and campaigning for this position, the APC position at the time, and it's on video, in fact, with Buhari himself being interviewed by the media, he was much more eloquent in interviews then than now. And he was eloquently positing, that subsidy is a scam and that this country has no business with doing anything subsidy. As soon as it comes, subsidy will be eliminated and the country will move ahead because the scam will end. 7 years down the road in his government, we are still in that scam and he's still, not ashamed of it. In a proper country where things work well, the government ought to resign on account of the fact that they cannot deal with the issue of subsidy. Because subsidy is the biggest drain pipe on the resources of this country. And so any government that comes and cannot grapple with it within the first 3 to 6 months actually ought to be shown the way out. But we are here, there is no consequence management for anything in Nigeria, and that is why we keep kicking the can down the road on a daily basis. The second reason why there is subsidy, why we are increasing the subsidy bill by almost 100%, is to, in my view, be able to fund the electoral expenses, of the APC government. I believe very strongly that, the government is going to rely on the sleaze from the subsidy, the alleged subsidy, to finance the campaigns for their party. Because we all know that electioneering in Nigeria is done with government money. So since we are entering an electoral season and subsidy is an issue, why don't you then increase the figure from 1.5 trillion to 3 trillion anyway? And then when you do that, you have an extra 1.5 trillion to spend on elections at different levels and buy the votes. So the government should come clean and explain to us why the figure has suddenly, when we had the money to import, double the number of cars. I know that instead of cars going up in number in my own family, cars have gone down because the ones that broke down, we could not either repair them or replace them. You get the point. So if we are not buying fuel anymore, for instance, all of this time they're complaining about petrol, scarcity, long queues. I don't bother about it because I don't have a functional car at this time. You get the point. My car is in the garage being fixed because the economy cannot support, the maintenance of cars. So where are the cars that we're buying this fuel inside? And how come the subsidy figures keep doubling on a daily basis?
I have a worry. Why is it that the governors in whose domain the ordinary Nigerians live and whose population feel the impact of any policy, any bad policy, are not complaining that the non-removal of subsidy is not making money available to them to run the life of the ordinary Nigerians?
I've seen, thanks very much, Chief Njoku. That's an excellent question. But I've seen some feeble complaints, from the Nigerian Governors Forum. I read something, I think on Monday or Tuesday in the newspapers, about the Nigerian Governors Forum complaining that, the subsidy payments are shortchanging them and putting less money in their hands. It's neither here nor there, because at the end of the day, okay, you put more money in their hands. How does it translate to better life for the people actually? You know, most of that money will end up in security votes, which the governor pockets without having to account for it to anybody. You get the point? So at the end of the day, we are not even so sure when they are agitating for more resources and more funds, whether they want those money for themselves personally or they want it for the good of the people. You know what I mean? We run a near criminal enterprise in the way the Nigerian governance is done at different levels. Now, such that when a government official is agitating for something, you don't know whether that agitation is actually for himself or for in the interest of the people. And in 98% of the time, it's actually in the interest of the personal interest of the people, of those in government. Because most of government budgeting actually goes to the individual government officials who are in power. What is the impact of the government budget last year on the average woman in my village or the man in my village? They don't care or know whether the government exists or not. You get the point? So year in, year out, when we do all these rituals of budgeting and National Assembly, those rituals are just self-seeking, you know, for the National Assembly members who pad the budget anyway. They will pad it and pocket the money, and then and then every year we go through this round of rituals, you know, budgeting and not budgeting, and wasting everybody's time. At the end of the day, they clap for themselves that the budget has been passed and will be implemented without see any implementation and impact the life of people. So we need to have a paradigm shift. We need to have a complete re-examination of the way we are governed. And I think the Nigerian public is extremely docile. They have to hold the people that are running the affairs of this country to account in a sustained and consistent way, so that, you know, they don't have a breathing space. Look at the frivolous, you know, rather near frivolous harassment of the British Prime Minister over whether they had a party during COVID lockdown or not. That's such a serious issue that they even
that
debate.
Is humane and human.
You know, they debate it at the national at their parliament. Here in this country, the president does something and you can ask him a question for what? The National Assembly will ask him to come and answer questions. He will ignore them and walk away, and nothing happens. You know, we run a country that is not sustainable, you know, the way we are going. And if we continue to run this way, honestly, we are going to get to a point where we don't have anything to hand over to our children. I really feel worried for this country because of the level of incompetence, the level of deliberate ignorance, and the crass mischief that is used to collectively run the affairs of this country year in, year out. You know, and we just hang in here. You know, we have very brilliant people in this country who know exactly what to do, and then those who have seized the reins of power, you know, hang in there. We pretend to be practicing a democracy where the voice of the people who actually cast the vote don't matter.
Well, it's a democracy. They say it's fledgling. They say we're just growing. But this afternoon, we're talking about the policy of retaining fuel subsidy. I've tried to reason that maybe the government is being considerate. But between politics and economy, which should be the government's greatest concern? I don't answer the question. Madaki says it should be economy and development. Subsidy doesn't answer to that. Subsidy wastes resource for that economy and for that development. And therefore, retaining it is a self-inflicted injury. In the past 35 minutes, 40 minutes, I've been conversing with Madaki Ameh, a lawyer, an oil industry player, a consultant, and now putting his head into service. I have avoided using the word politics because each time I converse with Madaki, he says politics to him is only a means into service, and that he wants to show that service can be honorable and not to be despised by the people. Also, Nick Agule tried to join us from Makodi in Benue State. We'll get part of what he said in the course of our putting this program together, but signal wasn't quite friendly. On your behalf and on my behalf, let me thank Madaki Ameh for coming to this conversation. Madaki, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Well, Nick, wherever you are, even though your signal failed, you must thank you very much for making the effort to join us. This conversation never ends. As I promised you in the very first edition of this program for this year, we're bringing in stronger issues and more people of knowledge and more people of profile. Let's meet next Sunday My name remains Mwabose Njoko. Good afternoon.